Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Douglas Macgregor expressed his viewpoint, highlighting the current situation in Kiev as akin to entering the Twilight Zone. Speculating on potential actions, he suggests that some individuals within the government may resort to violence. Mcgregor anticipates continued conflict with the possibility of a ceasefire, yet emphasizes the challenge of dealing with a Russian government that has severed ties with the West. He likely has connections to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and possibly the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, recalling previous incidents involving General Milley, who leaked his advice to the New York Times, suggesting negotiation for Ukrainians only to retract under pressure. It's clear that the ultimate decision-maker lies in the White House. It's doubtful anyone in the current administration wants to acknowledge any grave errors endangering Ukraine. In Washington, the prevalent belief held by nearly everyone inside the Beltway is that Russia is feeble and inept, and thus the U.S. should continue supporting Ukraine. The notion of reinforcing Ukrainians or establishing a secure zone near the Polish border is floated under the pretext of a no-fly zone to aid Ukrainian forces or refugees. However, unlike in past conflicts where the U.S. held significant leverage, particularly over naval and air power, the situation with Russia presents a different reality. There's an over-reliance on Polish forces despite their bravery, which is deemed irrational. While there might be some British special operations involvement, NATO as a whole lacks substantial military capacity. The proposed solution, as discussed, exceeds the capabilities of any European army. What are their options? It seems they're short on resources. Most of their ammunition and weapons have been depleted or captured by Russians. The situation reminds me of Hitler's unrealistic plans in 1944 and the Battle of the Bulge, where the German army lacked the capacity for such actions. Despite sincere beliefs, the assessment appears flawed, and Russia may not be ready for significant actions until January. Regarding troop numbers, information from Kyiv has been unreliable. Ukrainian forces are reportedly pressuring civilians into military service, reminiscent of historical conscription tactics. While Ukrainian soldiers express confidence, similar sentiments were echoed by German soldiers in 1945, suggesting caution. Interpreting their optimism. Controlling Western media might not be difficult for Russia, given existing sympathies. The numbers provided are once again deemed misleading. Reports suggest around 200,000 fresh combat troops, likely increasing to 700,000 by January, with roughly half engaged in combat operations. This significant numerical advantage, coupled with rigorous training, gives Russia a considerable edge. Additionally, Belarus is fully supportive of Russian efforts, offering resources and potentially over 75,000 troops stationed along the Polish and Lithuanian borders. Poland's strategic importance in countering Russia is acknowledged, with concerns raised about potential American intervention echoing past conflicts like Vietnam. There's apprehension that decisions may be influenced by influential figures in Washington rather than reflecting the reality on the ground in Ukraine. During World War II, Churchill highlighted the importance of looking at the broader trends rather than individual battles. Despite initial setbacks, he remained confident in the overall trajectory favoring the Allies. Similarly, the Russians, despite a slow start, have not suffered significant defeats. They're strategically positioned to defend annexed territories while preparing for major offensives in the coming months. The recent mobilization of 300,000 reservists indicates Russia's commitment to bolstering its forces. It's likely that this mobilization will continue, potentially increasing the number of troops million by January. This buildup reflects a response to perceived threats and demands for surrender, which Putin and his advisors reject. Regarding the recent discussions, it appears to be a trial balloon to gauge public reaction. However, there's genuine concern about potential U.S. involvement in Ukraine. The idea of a coalition of the willing indicates a lack of unity within NATO, with most European nations reluctant to engage in conflict with Russia. The feasibility of assembling such a coalition questionable, considering the limited availability of troops from allied nations. The urgency stems from the dire situation in Ukraine, with diminishing manpower and a dwindling ability to mount effective counterattacks. The presence of Polish soldiers and a foreign legion highlights the desperate attempts to sustain military operations. Despite the lack of evidence supporting direct confrontation with Russia, some in Washington seem determined to pursue such a course, believing in the possibility of coercing Russian submission, which is viewed as risky and misguided. According to reports, there are approximately 5,000 troops consisting of light infantry and 60 aircraft, potentially supported by Romanian forces. This deployment seems to represent a fraction of the coalition of the willing. Meanwhile, the remainder of the division is stationed in Poland, fueling speculation about potential actions in Odessa. However, such a move would likely provoke Russian retaliation, given Odessa's historical and cultural ties to Russia. Any attempt to interfere could escalate tensions and lead to significant casualties. Furthermore, there's concern about the possibility of resorting to nuclear weapons in the event of heavy losses. While Russia hasn't shown interest in nuclear escalation, their stance on responding to nuclear attacks is clear. The risks associated with the concept of limited nuclear warfare are evident, underscoring the need for caution in handling the situation. We're clearly unprepared for such an endeavor. The infrastructure isn't in place, ammunition supplies are lacking, and the proposed force sizes are inadequate. While the Russians made mistakes in their approach, they at least had guidelines to avoid harming fellow Orthodox slaves. However, we lack such constraints and are considering entering without adequate forces, which seems irrational given the vast size of Ukraine. The possibility of intervention seems more plausible than nuclear conflict, although the exact likelihood is uncertain. There's growing concern among insiders about the direction of policy, indicating a shift in thinking. The governance style in Washington tends to rely on public compliance, with little opposition typically seen for military actions abroad. However, this complacency has led to reckless decision-making, akin to a child playing with electrical sockets and forked out of innocence. The idea of intervening in Ukraine is dangerously foolhardy, akin to sticking a fork into an electrical outlet. The only significant territory loss reported was near Kharkov, where Russian forces encountered minimal resistance and subsequently withdrawn. Ukrainian attempts to regain control, particularly in areas like Kharkov, have been met with intense Russian opposition. However, despite sporadic gains, there's been no substantial withdrawal of Russian forces. Behind the front lines, sizable Russian contingents are positioned, indicating a focus on larger strategic objectives rather than minor territorial shifts. This suggests coordinated efforts involving hundreds of thousands of troops across multiple fronts. NATO, once revered, now faces internal challenges and waning public support, exacerbated by economic troubles and strained relations due to sanctions against Russia. The impact of these sanctions on European economies, coupled with Russia's retaliatory measures, further destabilizes the situation. Amidst pressing domestic issues like immigration and rising crime rates, many Europeans question the portrayal of Russia as a significant threat. On the matter of European involvement in the conflict, there's little appetite for engaging with Russian forces. European military capabilities are often symbolic rather than substantive, lacking recent combat experience and ill-prepared for a confrontation with Russia. The Russian military, once dismissed as inept, has demonstrated resilience and effectiveness throughout the conflict, severely weakening the Ukrainian government. Initially, there was a belief that pressure on Putin would lead to his resignation and destabilize Russia. But this notion has been dispelled. Russia possesses vast resources, and Putin maintains strong public support. Privately, European leaders likely acknowledge their misjudgment and are receiving concerned messages from various capitals.